So this is section 6, and we are going to be talking about partner scripts. I define partner scripts as scripts that you are writing together with other people, whether that's you collaborating with just a director or you collaborating with a whole team of writers to come up with a more complex story or a more well-rounded story. So I've seen partner scripts function in this way, particularly in my experience in independent film. So that's what I'm going to be sharing. So the main artistic authority on the project comes to a team of writers or a scriptwriter with what's called a treatment. So the treatment is a basic outline, an overview of significant elements of a film script. It's not in film format. It, generally speaking, doesn't have a ton of detail as to what happens. It mostly just kind of is a pitch packet in a way. So for example, it'll have either a description of a scene or a couple of scenes. It'll have an outline of the plot. It'll have what you want the film to start with, maybe some stuff you want to happen, and then where you want to end up at the end. But it's not necessarily connecting the dots like a script does. In addition to this, a treatment has basic outlines of all of the characters. And so it'll say, so-and-so, the main character, this is their personality, these are their attributes, this is what I want them to learn, this is their vices, things like that. It's kind of like basic character work for what you want the project to be, so that the team or the scriptwriter can have a better understanding of what the project is, what they're writing, where they want to go with their creative direction, things like they should research, there's things like that. So this is really important to know as a scriptwriter if you are working with other people. It might be really important for you to request a treatment if one isn't offered to you, just because it really, really helps the process, especially if you get stuck because you're like, I'm not sure where they're going with this. I'm not sure where they're going with this project. A treatment usually fixes all of those issues and really solves those issues very early on in a project. So they're super, super helpful as a screenplay writer who's collaborating with other people. So if you're the one in charge and you're collaborating, it may benefit you to write a treatment, but it's also important to note here that even if you're writing a script alone with any of the other types of scripts, a treatment is super helpful anyway. It's important because it gives you kind of like this calling card to go back to make sure you're staying on track with the storytelling, to make sure you don't forget anything. So yeah, a treatment's really important regardless of, type, but I particularly see it being important when you're working with other people. So you either being given a treatment or you giving a treatment to others is very, very significant. So with these types of scripts, what I've seen working on projects with them, it generally speaking, a rule of thumb is the more people involved in the script writing process, the longer the script is going to take to be written. And that's just because if you have more people, you have more creative opinions to discuss, you have more creative outlets to express, you have maybe some people who put priority on other parts of the story that you don't necessarily put priority on, or you have a lot of questioning of what's going on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could just lead to a better film project, but it also could be very detrimental to you as a screenwriter, especially if you're very, very committed to your artistic vision. Working on a partner script as a new screenwriter, it could either teach you things you didn't know and kind of be a nice security way to test out writing a screenplay for the first time, because it'd be nice to have other people to bounce your ideas off of, or it could really just teach you that you are a scriptwriter who likes to write alone because, you don't necessarily want the other opinions. You still want feedback. You just don't want somebody to be there with you the entire way of the process. So, partner scripts I think are helpful for beginners, but they could also be detrimental depending on why you're going into writing scripts. And that's why I said earlier, it's really important to work out why you're writing a script. If you're writing a script to process the world around you and it's from your perspective, maybe partner scripts aren't the best option for you because you feel like you're compromising on your artistic vision. Or maybe you want to write films that emulate Marvel DC movies, so you write a partner script with other people who have specialties in those areas, and you're all able to come together and create a better film because of it. Partner scripts, they are really just people coming together to work together. They could be partner traditional scripts. They could, serve many different functions, but this is just a way I see people coming together to write scripts. So this comes together in a couple different kinds of ways. So if you're looking to write a script with other people, there are a couple different ways you could do it. So the very first one is, if you have that creative lead from that foundation, you can either have groups and meetings in which all the writers come together and discuss the plot points. They can do index cards with script events and start to line those up on the wall and just kind of work out what should go where. And, that's how the story slowly develops over time, is meeting in that sort of way. Or if you're working one-on-one with a director, you could have weekly meetings or monthly meetings or however you feel with the director, where you as the script writer bring selects to the director and then you both discuss it. Or the opposite. As a director, you ask the script writer to bring slides or you bring them ideas, and then you guys meet and discuss if those changes work or don't work for the project as a whole. A third way to do this is to, now this is the messiest way, but I will suggest it because, everyone's journey is different, and I don't know if this would be helpful to somebody, so it might be helpful. But another way you could do it is, a lot of script writing software allows multiple writers on it at the same time. So some script writing software is similar to a Google Doc in that a bunch of different writers have access to it and can make edits and changes. So you could have a group of writers hypothetically all working on the same script at the same time. You would just have to be very clear about boundaries and very clear about what is and isn't okay to add and delete and etc. So that way it could take a lot more planning, but it could be helpful in the long term for your projects and for your script writing. So that's very in basic what a partner script is. Now, it's important to note here that while each of these kinds of script writing approaches have very different approaches, all three of these ways to write scripts, they're both complementary as well as could be done individually. So by that I mean, you could write a traditional script with a group of people. You could write a writer-director script for a traditional kind of route. So you could be writing a traditional script, selling it as the writer-director. This class is more so you can pick and choose what things you like about certain styles and develop them and incorporate them into your own script writing experience. So at this point, before we go into the last type of script, I just want to really, really emphasize that script writing is your journey, and I'm just giving you a bunch of different ideas, a bunch of different tools that you can pick and choose to enhance your storytelling. This class is just to give you an overview of many different tools, many different ways, so that you can take what works from all of them or some of them and apply it to your own screenwriting. Just know, screenwriting is your journey. They're your stories at the end of the day, and it's up to you what you do with them and how you write them and all of that. So just know, while these rules seem like hard and fast ones, just in the context of the class, they're really not. You can feel free to take as many of them and leave as many of them as you want. So yeah. But that concludes section 6, and we will be moving on to section 7, writer-director scripts. Hi, welcome to section 7 of the Pikes Peak Library District Screenwriting Basics class. In this section, we are covering scripts that are writer/director scripts. It's a script where the screenplay writer intends to be the director of the project. In action, I've seen direction in a script is most passable. And that is simply because the writer is the director and is going to be there 100% of the time for the rest of the process of making the film. So there's no need to clarify with the writer later on a piece of direction they gave to a scene to make sure that's not going to mess with anything in the script. The writer is the one calling the shots as the director. So direction in a script, things like shot composition, things like maybe hints of direction for actors and actresses, that's a little bit more acceptable in this form of script. This is most often how I write my work, and this is very, very highly recommended for people who are writing movies for the same reason I am, and that is I write movies to process the world around me. With writer-director scripts, if you're seeking to be a fully fledged aesthetic director, and that's kind of why you're interested in screenplay writing as well as directing, this is the best kind of approach because because you start an aesthetic look into the film at very early on in the process. You start the development of a certain style that is unique to yourself very early on in the process. And since words and script writing is so significant to what a film is, if you're a writer-director, it's just another way for you to enhance your viewpoint. Now, it's important to note that there's a double-edged sword with this, because some problems I've seen a lot of writer-directors, especially new filmmakers, get into is a lot of them have a problem with translating what their message is to an audience. The point of their work doesn't come across because they were the writer-director. And that's not to say that they cannot be a writer-director. That's to say that they didn't get the necessary audience feedback that they needed so their perspective can be translated to an audience. As a writer-director, you run into a very unique and interesting problem that, you might run into it with other forms of writing scripts and other reasons for writing scripts. But when you're a writer-director, and if you're writing scripts because, you want to give your perspective to the world, you think your perspective is unique and all of this stuff, that uniqueness can sometimes not translate to an audience. So that could lead to an audience being confused by your work. That could lead to an audience not understanding your work. But with writer-director scripts, it's very, very important that you get feedback, more so than other types of scripts. And when I say that writer-director scripts are double-edged swords, I also mean that it's beyond the point of artistic differences. So it's not that you have a certain visual signifier and somebody disagrees on what the signifier means, but at its inherent, they can understand what you were trying to get across. I mean that writer-director scripts can often fall into the problem of not being able to get across what they want because it's so in the director's head and they didn't seek out advice and feedback to help better translate what they were trying to say to an audience through the cinematic language. So that wraps up section 7. And next up, we're going to be talking about, technically speaking, what does a script look like? Hello, this is section 8 of Pikes Peak Library District Screenwriting Basics class. And in this section, we are going to be actually talking about what a script technically looks like, which is hilarious because we're almost towards the end. And it's funny that there's so much to screenplay writing and there's so much you do before you even put pen to the paper. There's so much you have to do and work out and figure out that, screenplay writing, it's a big job and it's a really, really important job. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because I thought it was really funny. Celltext.com is an excellent resource. I'm not sponsored. The library's not sponsored, nothing like that. It's a completely free resource. You can have up to 3 scripts at a time. But the beautiful thing about Celltext is it makes the whole process of figuring out what a script looks like really, really easy because you're just able to tab to see certain elements of the script. So you're able to tab to a scene heading or just select scene heading and it'll format it automatically for you. The really important thing to learn is the formatting of the header, where the characters are placed and where the action is written out in a script. I have a film anthology series that is currently on hiatus, and the one thing I noticed for filmmaking, it was a lot of filmmakers who were making films for their first time made films for the anthology series, and the one thing I noticed with a lot of the newer filmmakers was they didn't quite know how to format their script. You need to learn particularly where the scene heading is and what is included in a scene heading. Scene heading, it's usually highlighted, the top of the page, interior, exterior, what the location is, what the time of day is. Action is formatted to the left in normal paragraph format. All of the characters of a script are centered and their dialogue is centered as well. Parentheticals add extra detail to whatever the characters are doing. In addition, Celltext offers, the ability for you to see where shots are put on a script, how you can split up a script for shooting format. So Celltext is just such an excellent source. So yeah, that's going to be where I point you in the direction of so you could learn where the formatting is, because it will easily walk you through what those elements look like. So that wraps up section 8, what a script looks like. And we will now move on to the tips and tricks section, which will cover so much for your screenplay writing journey. Hello, welcome to section 9 of Screenwriting Basics with Pikes Peak Library District. So this section is helpful tips and tricks. This kind of covers everything, just some last final tips and things you should consider when writing a script. But like I've been saying this whole class, this class isn't to tell you the only way to write a script and the perfect way to write a script. This class is to give you many, many different tools so that you can take and leave what you want. You can decide what you want to use, what you want to incorporate, what you don't want to incorporate, and you can better effectively write scripts, and you can use tips and to your advantage. So just know that this isn't a one-stop, this is how you write a script and you'll be good. This is empowering you to find out what steps you need to take to be better as a screenplay writer or to learn how to write screenplays. So yeah, moving forward. So, helpful tips and tricks. You need to translate into the cinematic language. When I say that, to give you some context on how I write scripts. So I start writing scripts by writing out in semi-book format, like what I want the scenes to be. So I write out the scene as if I'm writing it in a book. And the thing about that is when you move to the script, it's not as easy as cutting and pasting what you had and just like plugging it into the script. You have to make sure you're translating everything that's happening into the cinematic language. Books are really nice because you get an internal sense of who the characters are. You get direct access to the character's mind and what they're going through internally. Whereas in cinema, you don't necessarily get that unless you introduce narration or something like that. So when you're translating into the cinematic language, you want to make sure that you can get across what you've written. I have a sequence in my latest film, Lenore, where she's on a balcony thinking about the Black Dahlia. Right? And so in her mind, as I wrote it down in the original formatting, she's in her mind thinking about the Black Dahlia, ruminating over it, discussing it. And when I translated that into cinematic format, all of that was lost because in film you don't have immediate access to every character's thoughts. There's something called the hierarchy of knowledge that you have to consider as a screenplay writer. And the hierarchy of knowledge is, how much information does the character know? How much information does the audience know about the character? Where are they at the hierarchy of knowledge? If the top of the hierarchy is knowing every single thing, then where is the character and where is the audience? And how does that create tension and et cetera, et cetera? But how does that affect your storytelling? Do you lose out a lot of storytelling because you're not considering that the audience may not know this because that's not how it translates onto film? You see a lot of people talking about books translated into movies and how it's a lot different. That's part of why it's a lot different, because in movies, you don't get a sense of who the character is internally. You have to externalize that. So you just want to make sure that everything you're writing in a script is going to translate to an audience. You don't have to start with the script formatting if that overwhelms you. You can start writing however you want. You can write in list format. You can write a list of how everything goes along. You can just write dialogue back and forth. You don't have to start with the scene heading, then action, then character dialogue, then blah, blah, blah. You don't have to start that way. You can start however you feel most comfortable. I know screenplay writers who film themselves talking about the script, and then later on they write out the dialogue that worked and the dialogue that didn't. Screenplay writers who talk to themselves in the mirror to test out how their dialogue naturally sounds. So you don't have to get stuck with the formatting of the script. The formatting of the script can come later. The storytelling needs to be first. The why you're telling the story, the what the story is, the what's the aim of them telling the story. Is it going to translate? All of that comes first to the script formatting. The formatting, you're always going to be able to format a script later on. I've also had people write very, very in-depth treatments and character bios and a bunch of books about world building and the world the people live in before they write the scripts. And sometimes that information doesn't even make it into the script because it's most helpful for the screenplay writer when they're trying to define out what the world is and what they're doing. The story always comes first. Hollywood is about storytellers first. Formatting is important. I'm not gonna lie. Formatting a script is very important to know. It's very important to eventually do to your script, but your story is first. So next, if you are still struggling with the story, if you've taken a step back from the formatting and you're still kind of struggling developing a narrative, I learned this from an Aaron Sorkin masterclass. Aaron Sorkin wrote the famous line that's like, "You can't handle the truth." So he gave advice of, if you're struggling with a story and what you want characters to do, but you have characters you want to write, start with what the characters want and then go from there. How far are they willing to get what they want? What gets in the way of what they want to get? You know, that's a really, really good place to start if you have characters, but you're struggling with the actual technical events of what is going to happen to them. The next really important step is to show, don't tell. Now, this is a weird rule applied to the script, but when I say this, I mean, most importantly, don't tell your audience how to feel. Don't tell your audience how they should feel about a character. Don't explain things away to your audience with characters. I've seen a lot of TV shows recently where something will happen in the script, and for some reason, the script will then a couple minutes later explain to the audience what just happened through the dialogue. You don't need to do that as a screenplay writer. There's an element of trust you should have with your audience, and that's just a matter of trial and error. Now, extending from that show, don't tell, it might help with storytelling for you to play around with where scenes are placed. Now, when I say this, I mean you get a bunch of index cards once you have a certain amount of scenes, or all your scenes, or some of them. Get index cards and write like little scene descriptions for each and every scene on an individual. So you take an index card for each scene and you write out what happens in it and give a basic overview, and then you either on the wall or on a corkboard lay all of that out and play around with where these scenes are placed and see if that changes how your storytelling functions. See if that changes how you look at your own screenplay. It's very similar to a painter flipping their painting upside down to get some perspective on it, or flipping their painting to the side. It's kind of the screenplay version of that. So it allows you to get a different look at your script completely. So that's really, really helpful if you get stuck in the storytelling or you think something's missing and you're not sure what. This is very, very important, this next tip, and that is to speak to people about their experiences if you are writing characters that are not like you. And this is especially true for women and minorities. And I mean this for everybody, regardless of who you are, regardless of your background, regardless of where you're from, what you look like. If you're writing somebody's experience, consult them. And this could be applied to so many things too. Like, I've also seen this work out I frequently have had historical consultants for my films so that I could have discussions about the time period. Think about it, if you're a theater person, you could also think about it in terms of dramaturgy. You just want to get research done to understand the experiences that you are presenting in your film, because you want your films to be as authentic as possible, and that's a way you can make them as authentic as possible. And then this next one we've been talking about a lot, but I just want to re-emphasize it in the tips and tricks. Learn the interworkings of archetypes and tropes throughout cinema. Get a really strong understanding of cinematic history, where certain interpretations of certain people came up, where certain, tropes and archetypes and all of that, how they all function and what they all have said in the past, because that allows you as a screenplay writer to play with them and push them into new boundaries and new spaces and new areas. And it really just enhances your storytelling because it increases the tools in your toolbox. You can be really in-depth as a screenplay writer, and that's the really cool thing about being a screenplay writer. So yeah. Hi everyone, this is the Pikes Peak Library District Part 10 of Screenwriting Basics, and we are at the end of the class now. I did an Instagram Q&A on some screenwriting questions some of my peers had, just to include in the class, just in case, to have a little Q&A session. So I have 4 questions that I'm going to answer in this section, and then we'll do a quick overview of the class, and then the class will be over. So yeah, starting off. So first question comes from Elise Garner at Skipper Elise, and that is, where do you get your inspiration, and do you write a story linear or just random bits and pieces at a time? So me personally, I get inspiration from a lot of different places. As a female filmmaker, I love the idea of updating certain genres and certain styles of film that I really like that were defined by men, but just through my own female gaze, through a female lens. So I get a lot of ideas from stories through male filmmakers I really respect and enjoy. Secondary, I use film to process through my life, kind of like we've been talking about this entire time. So I write films based off my individual experiences, right? And so when I say I write films based off my individual experiences, and if you're interested in something like that, I highly recommend keeping a journal, writing about your experiences day to day, how they made you feel. And then when you get to the actual script writing process, I highly recommend dramatizing them and putting other characters into those situations that you were in and using your situations as a template for what your characters go through. Because in that way, you have your own kind of character arc because you were able to see how you changed over time with certain events and certain things that happened to you. So you're able to just apply that to the characters. And that's a really, really fun thing to do with film. And the other thing is, I know myself and a lot of people I know, we joke about overthinking a lot, and that's another way to find film inspiration. It's a way to take power away from overthinking, because instead of overthinking becoming negative, you're using it for your films and for your art and for your filmmaking. So that's another way I get inspiration. So with the do I write the story linear, I definitely don't write a story linear. I could not write a story linear. I would be so overwhelmed. I've tried it before. You just get stuck after a while and frustrated, because you kind of start to shut down creative ideas you have that could be applied later on to a project and to a film. I highly recommend doing random bits and pieces at a time, because then the story kind of flows more organically, and you can do the exercise with the index cards and like see where everything should fit. But I highly recommend non-chronologically writing your story, because otherwise you're just going to get a little overwhelmed, I think. So next up is a question from Bailey O'Hara at BEXO Hara. What's your favorite piece you've written to date? So my latest film is a film called Lenore. It is a feature-length film. And so just to kind of work out, because I didn't quite discuss this in the class, the difference between a feature-length film and a short film, generally speaking, with BAFTA and Academy requirements, a feature-length film is any film that is over 45 minutes, and a short film is a film anywhere below that 45-minute mark. Both film types are completely valid. Their storytelling, however, I will say, is very, very different. So as a screenplay writer, you approach writing a 5-minute short a little different than you would approach writing a hour-and-a-half long feature-length film. And that's just a huge reality. Artistically speaking, there's not a lot of difference, but the way you execute the storytelling is very different. Yeah, so Lenore is my favorite feature film I've written to date, but the reason as a student, it's not very common to make feature-length films, and so a lot of people always ask me why I make feature-length films. And the reason is, I very early on knew I wanted to be a film director, and I wanted to be a film director that directed feature-length films. So I wanted to practice making feature-length films before I get to my actual first one. If you want to write feature-length films, I highly recommend you practice writing feature-length films so you can start to understand storytelling at that length, storytelling from that angle, because it is a little different than writing a short film. If you want to write short films, practice writing short films. But yeah, I just highly recommend you play around with both types to see which better fits what you're doing with film and what you want to do as a screenplay writer with film. But there are differences between feature length and short film. So this next question comes from Respect the Classics. I am not sure your actual name, so I'm sorry. But their question is, how do I stay consistent with my writing habits? So there's a couple different ways. So as a screenplay writer, it's really important to either set aside time, either once a day, once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks, whatever you can fit into your schedule. Set aside time dedicated to improving your craft. But I really want to emphasize that script writing and screenplay writing, it's about so much more than just the actual act of writing a script. A lot of screenplay writers get very burnt out because they think the only way to improve is to just write 7 million scripts, and that's not the case. You become a better screenplay writer by writing scripts, by reading scripts, by watching movies and reading the script as you're watching the movie, by understanding, archetypes and studying, other art forms that tell stories. You become a screenplay writer through so many other means. So while it's very important to carve out time for actual writing, it would also benefit you to carve out time dedicated to just the act of learning, the act of, oh, today I'm not going to write a script because I'm not feeling up to it, but instead this time I'm going to start to study this specific archetype over time. I'm going to read a chapter of Hero with a Thousand Faces. I'm going to look at this old movie that everyone talks about to see why everyone talks about it and why everyone references it. All of those things will make you a better screenplay writer. So I just want to emphasize, because I see a lot of screenplay writers do it, don't get burnt out thinking the only way to become a better screenwriter is to burn yourself out writing stories and coming up with stories and writing 10 million stories. I know like sometimes it can be a gatekeepy kind of thing where screenplay writers are like, well, I write a story about every single thing that happens to me every day and I have hundreds of millions of stories. That's fine, and if that is your truth and that is, how you improve, that's great, but that's not everybody. And you are just as valid of a screenplay writer if you have 5 stories to tell and you focus your time on researching and learning how storytelling functions in the world around us so that you can best effectively tell those 5 stories you have. So yeah, that's the advice I have on how you hone in on your writing habits or stay consistent with your writing habits. So the next question is from Miraula. I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. At Plasmatics. I'm sorry. That question is, how many scripts have you written? And I think this is kind of funny because I did talk about formatting a lot. I don't know how many scripts I've written because scripts have taken a lot of forms in my life and they've flowed a lot. Now, for all the actual projects I've executed fully, I do have a formatted script. But there were some projects in, college where the script was just an outline on a page and it wasn't that, the script formatting and everything wasn't that serious. Don't get caught up in the idea of, the only scripts that matter and the only scripts that count that I've written are scripts that have fully seen the light of day or scripts that have gone to fruition. Scripts could be something like a story idea on a sticky note. When one of my films, Kingpin, I wouldn't say it's like pinnacle of cinema, but for the longest time, the script of Kingpin was a sticky note with the plot outline on my binder in college. I looked at that sticky note for almost 2 years and would write little plot details on it or write character names on it, slowly developing it before it even became a formatted script. And that still counted as a script. So, just think of scripting in a more of an open sense because we're in a new independent age, and I think this is a really good point. This is part for the question and part to close the class, but we're in a really, really amazing time in which accessibility for filmmaking is so vast now. Everybody pretty much has a 4K camera in their pocket, and that's a reality and not a lot of, veteran filmmakers want to face. But I'm here to tell you, don't let anybody tell you you're invalid because you're using what tools you have around you. Filmmaking is one of the most accessible art forms right now, and you are allowed to carve a space out for yourself, whether that's posting your film to YouTube, whether that's posting it to Vimeo. Any way you can, if you write a script and you show it to other people, you are completely valid as a filmmaker and as an artist. And it's so important as we move into this new independent generation to recognize that the same rules may not apply anymore. The same rules may not apply to the extent that they applied before. And that's really, really important for all of you new filmmakers and even old filmmakers who are here trying to learn something new. It's really important to emphasize and know that as you go along in your filmmaking journey, you're a part of a very beautiful time for film. You're a part of a very interesting time with film. And that's super exciting as a screenplay writer because, like I've said before in this class, screenplay writing is the first foundational step of any movie. And it's one of the biggest, most unappreciated jobs. And, you're empowered. You have all the tools at your disposal, even if you don't realize it. And that's just what I really want to emphasize in this class. So hopefully this class gave you some tips or tricks. Hopefully it gave you some context to certain things, but it was super wonderful. I thank you so much to Pikes Peak Library District for having me. And yeah, thank you all so much. You can find me at _Renaissance Woman. I would be happy to answer any of your film questions there going forward. I do frequent Q&As and I'm always happy to help. So just slide into my DMs if you need to know how to write a script. And you can also find me at erynmitchell.com and IMDb to find all of my projects. But thank you so much. Thank you again to Pikes Peak Library District. Thank you for watching and taking the class. And I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Bye. Mwah.